Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is the Redbird Reboot. Thank you guys so much, at least for joining with us today. We've got at Pancake Soul, Marcos Labrada is here with me, and I'm Blake Murphy7. We get to talk today about a Cardinals 0-2 team, and what we feel like probably could have been a Cardinals 2-0 team. Unfortunately, another second half, fourth quarter defensive collapse, offensive output goes from looking pretty decent to unfortunately just petering out over the last part of the game. Marcos, what's kind of your instant reaction to just the way that this game went as we saw a 21-point lead, Cardinals up 28-7, turn into a 31-28 Giants victory?
We had such high hopes that this was going to be the first win of the season, and it was a dominant first half. We were like, oh wow, we are lightning. We're like light years ahead of what we were last week on offense, at least. And defense, it just seemed like, hey, we're just going to continue on with the defense. And then it just after that, like that second half collapse, just not. I don't even know what to say about that as far as like the adjustments were made on by the Giants offense, and the defense was clamping down.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of adjustments we can talk about. At least a lot of those adjustments came from the Giants on their side. One of the biggest takeaways that I had, at least early on in the game, was how the Cardinals were able to come out early, and they really did a great job, at least, of driving down the field against this Giants defense. You had them drive down at least and miss the field goal. Were able to get that touchdown on that angry Josh Dobbs run. They then came and had another touchdown, at least, that they're able to have with, I believe this was the second touchdown of the Josh Dobbs run. The first one, they were able to have the James Conner up the middle, at least from the 4. You had the couple of penalties, at least, that popped up with that long third down to Michael Wilson for 21 yards. Cardinals offense was really effective. They were able to kind of get the ball run. They were able to kind of chunk yards down the field. They were able to run a lot of plays, and then they forced the Giants to kind of punt it every single time to them. At least I believe there was a total of, it was a total of 11 plays that the Giants ran, I think, on like their first 3 drives. Like, it was ridiculous what Arizona defense was doing. They were playing a lot, I think, of quarters coverage early on, where they were effectively putting everyone into zone, putting kind of 4 guys dropping in, which did a great job of, once they were strong up front, being able to stop the run. When on those pass plays, they were being aggressive, knocking the ball down. And then it really was just a huge change, story of 2 halves, where the Giants adjusted. The Cardinals just were not able to counterpunch. Do you have any thoughts on the offense, at least, of what they showed? Because I think a lot of Cardinals fans went into this game feeling down on Josh Dobbs, and then by the end of that first half, there was almost like a new feeling that we had about Josh Dobbs as the starter, as we saw him take that leap from week 1 that he said they were going to take.
Well, I saw a lot of confidence, and that gave me like a lot of it was the confidence in knowing that he was able to hit his step and know where to hit, like what targets to hit. He seems to have his favorite target in Zach Ertz and Trey McBride, so we know that he in a way prefers to throw to those over the middle like runs, either whether they're the dig routes or the slants to like they're his safety blanket. So we know what his preferred areas are, but he just had the confidence of like whenever he would be under center and they'd suck the linebackers in, he knew that he could throw it right behind the linebackers to a wide open like Zach Ertz, or to like that one catch by Trey McBride. So it was, you just saw like somebody that knew once he turned his back to the defense, when he turned back around, he knew where he was going to throw that ball. The second half, it just that was all gone. It was almost as if he kind of didn't want to be the reason why we lost the game by turning the ball over. Maybe that was the reason why the play calls kind of changed. And I know some part of it could be that, hey, we're just trying to burn off clock because, it's a situation where you try to make the clock be an extra defender for the Giants, and it didn't work out at the end. It's a
First half offensively, we saw the Cardinals, I think, have a really good job of being in a balanced offense. We got to see how the play action fakes. You had guys open in Zach Ertz and Trey McBride. You also were able to at least see a bit of diversity in some of the play calling where if it was third and long, Josh Dobbs was actually throwing like strong, accurate passes. They didn't have that many deep shots that they took, and they didn't need to. You also were able to see sometimes where they were trying to get pressure on Dobbs. They were able to kind of run the ball with James Conner, and a couple of times they caught their safeties looking down, trying to come down into the box. Conner was able to kind of pick off some big gains. The second half, it was very different as far as they adjusted. I think if I had to say the one thing that the Giants did defensively that really changed stuff was they dared Josh Dobbs to throw the ball. They put the Cardinals in a position where they said, hey, we're going to let you have this deep look that's going to be here. We're just going to make sure that you're not able to run. You're not going to be able to play outside the pocket. We're not going to lose contain on you. And to like his credit, Josh Dobbs, at least he avoided throwing one of those interceptions overall. He probably had one that was called back, I believe, just because of there was like an illegal contact play, I think. But ultimately, it was almost like they said, hey, Josh Dobbs, you go out and win the game on your offense. And then they looked at Daniel Jones and said, Daniel, use those legs. We'll be able to get stuff opened up for you on the defensive side of the ball for the Cardinals. They just did not have an answer. We'll, at the end of the show, we'll go over a little bit of film that shows some of that adjustment, but it really felt to me like it was almost like watching a Kyler Murray game of terms of in the first half, Kyler isn't using his legs as much, offense may be struggling, and in the second half, they make an adjustment, and then you're able to see Daniel Jones, like he picked up a third down and 3rd and 12, just being able to scramble out of the pocket while guys were covered. You also had some poor penalties, I think, on the offensive side for Arizona, where you were able to at least see that last drive. They're trying to run the ball, be able to go and have it where you can see, like, just get down and get a field goal is all that you needed to do. Cardinals end up only going 3 and out, and then, of course, the end of the game, their Hail Mary effort fails. I think that the play of the game ultimately, in a lot of ways, came down to it's 1st and 10 on the New York Giants 43. You just got to get about 10 more yards. You can get a field goal. James Conner loses a yard. Incomplete pass to Hollywood Brown. And it's 3rd and 11. They do that other deep pass to Hollywood Brown. And you end up punting it back to the Giants on 4th and 11. Giants immediately go on a long touchdown drive, picking up 15 yards, 25 yards. You really ended up seeing at least the Giants at the end of the game. They just had, I think, better players than Arizona. They were able to complete Darius Slayton. Darren Waller was able to go. They were able to protect Daniel Jones. Cardinals were trying to figure out how they could be able to defend this passing game. And I just think that that was part of where it came down to is that at the end of the day, one person needed to make a play. And I don't think that they had that guy on the field, unfortunately, on Sunday who was able to make that play for the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I mean, it's just a sad situation where we had it in the first half. Why didn't we complete it in the second half? That was our issue.
Right.
We had the players to be able to do it because we showed it on the field, especially against this Giants team that before they went into week 1, I don't think people were thinking they were that bad. And then they went into week 1, couldn't even score 1 point, couldn't even put up a field goal against the Cowboys. And we're going up against them like feeling more confident. People, the national media was still, mentioning that, hey, this is still going to be a landslide victory by the Giants. I don't know why the Cardinals think they have this confidence and whatnot. But it's because we follow the team. It's because we're able to see what we see with them. Maybe you guys don't know the players that we have, but we know what we have within ourselves as well. And we showed it. So it's a situation where like they may have more star players on their side of the team, but we do have the foundation. That's like you mentioned so many times before. We need a foundation. Well, this is a good foundation to build up from.
Yeah, I think this is something with Cardinals fans. Everyone was talking about on social media. They said, hey, I know we're all making fun of Jonathan Gannon, but like he's got the Cardinals playing hard. JJ Watt talked about like the job that he was doing. This is a team that people, are saying before the season would go 0-17, and then last week they're overperforming some, they lose. And then to be able to come out after a loss last week, going into a Giants game, you're seeing them come out after an 0-40 game. And a lot of the thought was, hey, like, this is going to be a place where the Giants are just going to come out, throw the ball at will on Arizona and that group of players, and kind of get that get right game for the Giants. Instead, it seemed like it was going to be more of a, hey, Cardinals are just going to be whooping that is what it turned into for the first 2 quarters of play. Saquon just was bottled up for the most part. You were able to get pressure on Daniel Jones, and at the end of the play, you at least had while they're throwing more. Ball gets batted in the air, you pick that off. It just seemed like everything was coming up right for the Cardinals. So at some point, you want to credit and say, hey, the Giants went back, they adjusted, they regrouped, and they didn't make that game-breaking mistake in play. They didn't really have like a Daniel Jones sack fumble from holding the ball on or trying to scramble and then falling on the ground at least or getting sacked. I think a lot of what you can say as far as narrative, in some cases you credit the Giants, but another thing I think at least also is you can at least see how the first half, the Cardinals outcoached the New York Giants. They came out at least in looks that had Daniel Jones holding on to the ball, didn't know where to go with it. You were seeing a lot more of those blitzball type of concepts. I think that we're seeing guys standing up on the line of scrimmage and then dropping back right into some of those spots he was looking to throw. The person I think had a really good job of pointing some of this out as far as the difference between the first and second half was Brett Coleman did a tweet that came out just about an hour ago, and it talked about how when you're looking at different types of coverages, the first half, Cardinals played a lot of quarters coverage, which basically is going to be you've got that's not cover three. You're going to have kind of four guys for this. Your corner is going to play in zone. You got then two deep safeties. You're able to take away the deep pass. And what that also did was in quarters, you're kind of keeping that underneath coverage. So they tried to run a mesh concept. Basically, like whenever you're running a concept of mesh, the idea is you're trying to see if you can put these linebackers into conflict. Wasn't able to be pulled off. Cardinals did a really good job of being able to make sure that those passing lanes weren't there. And by having some of that quarters coverage, when they tried to run the ball up the middle with Saquon, Cardinals were able to stop it. The second half, what changed was, and this is almost an air raid concept we saw Cliff Kingsbury use. I should say not getting Cliff Kingsbury. At times he would with Patrick Mahomes, but we also saw it with Lincoln Riley. When teams would say, hey, you've got a running quarterback on a run game, we're wanting to make sure we can kind of have some of that coverage set. They shifted what they did as far as with the coverage, and we'll do this more in our video film, into essentially saying, hey, if you're going to play quarters coverage, we're going to make sure that your safety play, we're going to design where we got a couple of deep routes. Your safety's going to have to pick one side or the other, and then we can throw a deep ball. First play, right out of the half. They dial up a deep play to the 4-3 speedster Jalen Hyatt on Marco Wilson. You can see at least at the safety, he's in the middle of the field. He's late getting over. And that was just one of those plays where they were able to take advantage of Arizona playing a lot of the zone because he turned that zone coverage into a man coverage. You can see Andre Chachere. We'll take a look at this play later. But, wow, that was a great adjustment from Brian Daboll. And the Cardinals, unfortunately, once he kind of had that deep pass, it was almost like that broke the dam open. Like, all of a sudden, you're able to see more of these types of different plays. They had to respect the deep pass. They all of a sudden started being able to hit some of those slants over the middle. And really, at the end of the day, you just weren't able to get a stop. And Daniel Jones used his legs, and the Cardinals just were not able to adjust. Now, I think we can talk about the next part now, which is the tanking allegations. There's a lot of people who were like, hey, the Cardinals played strong in the first half. And the joke was almost like, wow, I guess like the owner must have called them in the second half and said, you guys suck. Or, maybe it's like a terrible halftime speech. Maybe some people said it was like, oh, they're just going to be tanking. Now, look, they get a big lead and then, they blow it. They have to lose. Did you feel like it was almost like intentional in that aspect? Or is this a spot where like we're really overthinking and this is more of a Cardinals team that blew it and a Giants team that went out and took it for themselves? Because that's what I really saw the second half of yesterday.
I don't think it's gonna be as simple as like, hey, they're just playing too good, and the owner's like, hey, can you guys like dial it back or whatnot? It does look like it could be scripted exactly that way because the feel, the culture, the play calling, and everything looked more conservative. But that's more of like I think more of what they did was they knew what they had with Josh Dobbs, so they were like, yeah, let's just play it safe from here. Let's not force a mistake. If it was another quarterback in there, probably like Kyler Murray or maybe even Clayton Tune, they probably would try their shots down the field or at least try to get something big over the middle. But when it came to Josh Dobbs, I don't think they knew what they had. So they knew where their limitations were, and they didn't want to put this game on his shoulders to say, hey, okay, you now you got to put your neck on their throat more so than, hey, we got a sizable lead. Let's just use the clock to our advantage. Well, one of the things they didn't account for is that they have Dexter Lawrence as their defensive lineman who was wrecking the Cardinals in the second half. His name was getting called quite a bit, and I wouldn't be surprised if him and some of the other defensive linemen were kind of like shutting down what was going on and what was being successful in the first half with which was, runs to like James Conner. Even it just didn't really matter after that. Once they took that away, it was like, okay, we're gonna have you beat our corners and our safeties and whatnot. And that's where we started seeing more of like the yak like underneath type of stuff, and it didn't translate. Another thing is maybe the circumstance can be justified by looking at it from the perspective of like, yeah, they were playing really well. What happened? Adjustments happen. You have to give it to like Brian Dable, just like that tweet said right there. They knew that they were going up against quarters 70% of the time on first down, or I'm not sure if it said first down or the first half. When he made that play call, like Marco Wilson's supposed to bail to his deep quarter, and the safety came down. So
Yep.
maybe part of the reason why Marco Wilson didn't keep up with that wide receiver was because if it was going to be a
Thought
post
he
over
had
the middle,
help.
that would, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He was expecting help. Maybe he looks over and he sees the safety coming down further down, which is why like having a Buda Baker know what his assignment is and having the experience is already manning that deep like quarter, and you essentially think to yourself, well, then that's taken care of right there. But they went and took advantage, and that changed the momentum. And I am a firm believer that momentum is it's a big factor when it comes to games.
Yeah, and a lot of people who are analytics nerds say they don't believe in momentum, but I think part of that rules out the idea of when you're a player, at least, who effectively is watching what's happening in real time, there's a human element of it, like, oh no, we got to do this, or oh, I messed up, and I think that's something that a lot of analytics people sometimes say, like, oh, momentum isn't real, and then you watch it play out, and it's like, yeah, you can find where the game changing moment is, but analytics are also something that the way they're designed, they're almost after the fact. Like, you're basically not able to say, like, hey, why did he throw that ball? And wow, he threw that ball at, like, super high velocity and it fit it right into that corner. Well, you have to measure the velocity in order to have, like, data and then go from the data. Part of where I think, at least, like you said, is there's a lot of the game that is played ultimately by belief. I think at the end of the game, we really saw whether it was a Cardinals offense or a Cardinals coaching staff or in whatever place. I think that what the Giants it really came down to is they said, we believe that our quarterback, Daniel Jones, with how he's able to use whether it's legs, arm, and weapons, we believe he's going to be able to come out and be able to win this game. They came out throwing it. Whereas on the Cardinals side, whether it was that self-belief or whether it was just frustration, I think of those penalties where Cardinals at least were in third manageable, 2 false start penalties effectively in a row with Elijah Wilkinson. They just check it down on third down. It felt like that was kind of like some of the air escaping the building because you're like, oh, gosh, like, Cardinals just had a chance. They get like another first down or two. They're able to run more time off the clock. They could pin the Giants back deep potentially. The fact that they ended up ending the game similar to last week where it was punts 3 times, or punts 1, 2, I think it was 3 times in a row that they punted just to end the game. It really felt like in one case or another, the belief was not there for the Cardinals in offense. And I think a lot of it can kind of be chalked up to this is a team that probably wins this game if Kyler Murray's there. I think Josh Dobbs as a quarterback, like we saw in the first half, he's better, I think, than people may have expected, but there's also limitations. There's that deep throw that was intercepted and negated by penalty that was gone to Hollywood, and then he just was not able to, unfortunately, make the plays that the Cardinals needed, and that's just where they are right now. And so I know a lot of fans are going to be like saying, like, hey, you got to credit them. You got to say they did a good game plan. They made adjustments. It's probably what it sounds like we're saying, at least, too. And I think that the frustration is it's easier to be able to, like, look at some of those things and to say that when the reality might be, like, Marcos, this is a team that probably overperformed somewhat in the first half, and in the second half, they kind of underperformed a bit, but when it levels out, it's like they kind of showed you, I think, where they were, which is not that great of a team. And I don't think you want to see your coach go out and say, yeah, we lost the game because our quarterback doesn't believe in himself. And the Giants basically, ran some adjustments and we were not able to stop the run or go deep or cover deep like we wanted to. Like, it's not as simple as just saying Cardinals didn't have Buda Baker. That would have made the difference in the second half. But I think at the end of the day, that is a huge part of it. And we're probably not talking about that enough, at least, of just the impact he makes on the field. Oh, Marcos, if you want to check your button there, I think we can
There we
continue
go.
on. Go ahead
Yeah,
with what you were
sorry about
saying.
that.
Don't want to miss what you're saying there. I know it's live shows we're having to get used to for all of that, right?
Yeah, I gotta get used to like muting and unmuting, but just like well, it's all about nuance. Just like I mentioned so many times, it's way more. It's not just as simple as just like, hey, if we had one player, we would win this game. In some instances, you can say that, especially if we did like if we did have somebody that can at least pick up yards with his legs and be able to like target the outside, then that would have most likely won us the game, because that was the issue with us not being able to move the ball consistently, was that we couldn't do those deep throws, or we couldn't like get that one big like conversion, or one big play and whatnot. And on the opposing side, they were testing our corners, and our corners were doing a great job in the first half. Now they're yeah, the second half it was just nope. They were testing us, and they kept winning.
Yeah, I think the tanking questions, at least that are popping up for a lot of people, like that was the biggest thing that I think people were wondering about. Like I saw people saying after the game, "Oh, it's all good. Like they played hard and they still lost. You tanking for picks." And I think that the mentality that you can have as a fan is always different, because what we're seeing with this team in this place is they're trying to be able to work on building a winning culture. We've seen how even with adding Kyler Murray at the first overall pick, it just took a long time before the Cardinals were actually able to build up a roster to be able to get good. And I think quarterback play is important. But there's teams that will lose their starting quarterback and yet can still go on and perform. Like, because at the end of the day, you don't just simply go out there on a Sunday if you're a player. Just say, oh, you know what? Let's just fast forward to 2024. That's something that I think fans can have the luxury sometimes of doing. I think there's fans who don't have the luxury of that, because they're the ones paying for the tickets. They're the ones who are going and supporting the team. They're the ones who are, making plans to go out and follow and support the team on the road. And that's where I think I'm disappointed for the most, is for the players themselves, who effectively went out and played well enough offensively, defensively, to win that game. And in the second half, they just did not play well enough to maintain that lead. And it's just a disappointment for Cards fans as far as being at home for another roller coaster of emotions of people being like, hey, Cardinals aren't going to go 0-2. Like we saw them play hard last week. They're just need to put it away in the second half. The other thing was the New York Giants team. We were talking about them being outscored 60-0 through the first six quarters. Like everyone's talking about, like, oh, are the Giants like, oh, well, I guess the Giants are tanking, now is like what people were like making jokes about. So not only did you blow the lead to a team that had been outscored 60-0, they made adjustments and were able to effectively go out when you really did have, with a 3 touchdown lead. You should have been able to at least find a way to pick up a few first downs, run the ball more, put the Giants into a negative situation. And instead, it just felt like, Marcos, in the last 2, 3 drives, it was like the Cardinals are going to go 3-and-out here, and the Giants are going to go down and score a touchdown. And it just felt like that was almost inevitable. That's where I think that there's just, for whatever reason, with that confidence, maybe you can talk about it being with the first time head coaches. That's where I think the people are going to accuse the Cardinals of tanking. And like, yeah, I don't think that you're going to end up seeing, unfortunately, that narrative change until the Cardinals can go out and be able to get that win, or until you can see Kyler Murray come back. They're still going to have those questions asked about them.
Yeah, I felt like it. I felt like it was destiny. I'm not even gonna lie. I'm like, oh my god, is this gonna happen? Are they gonna really drive down? Are they really gonna complete this comeback? Are they really? And I was like, there's no chance. There's no chance. Like, oh, we're on offense, but I really don't believe. I don't think they're gonna pick up that first down. And there we go. We give it back to them, and I was like, okay, on defense, come on. And it was just a punch to the like the to the to the stomach, when like they pushed them back on that. I'm not sure if it was a holding call or if it was a false start. So maybe it was like what, like first and like 15 from the goal line and stuff. So 15 yards, they pick up like what, like 6 yards. So they're a little bit closer. And on the very next play, they just go for the end zone, and then that's it. And I'm like, yep, that's how it feels. It feels like, and plus the noise that was being made on our offense, it was just irritating to know that like there's so much of like fan bases that travel to our own stadium. They make our own stadium feel like it's a visiting stadium. They make noise on our offense, and it was just irritating. I was like, yeah, this game's going out, and it ended up going out. So I'm like, oh.
Yep. Yeah, there were three false starts that were done by the offensive line, and it's from the three guys who were, or from, I should say, the two guys who were not with the team last year, or are not Paris Johnson, who's starting over at right tackle, as far as making those mistakes. So it's fourth quarter. You've got a bunch of time left. At least Giants have just gone down on a long drive. You're only up by 7. Cardinals start off first and 10, incomplete pass. Second and 10, James Conner only gets 1 yard. You're at third and 9. It's still at least manageable. It's doable. You get a false start, at least called on the center. So then you end up having just a check down pass to Amari DiMercado. You punt it back to the Giants. They go down and get a touchdown. Now, you still have the opportunity with just about 4 minutes left. You go down and get 3 to 4 first downs or so, kick the ball through the uprights. You at least have a lead. You give the ball back to them, but they've only going to have like about a minute or less left. All you need then is basically just to get one stop. The Giants would have to be then driving down the field, and at worst, you go to overtime, right? Because you may not have enough time left in that game to be able to go down. Instead, what do you see? First and 10, right? James Conner up the middle, 1 yard. Second and 9. This is the play that I think is maybe the interesting one that we'll maybe see as far as how that Josh Dobbs narrative shifted. It looked like he either audibled or something shifted. They end up running James Conner up the middle on second and 9. At that point, you're like, they're trying to run time off the clock. There's 4 minutes left. At some point, you do have to ultimately be able to pick up a few first downs, be able to at least have the ability either to run the ball or help your quarterback. Third and 6, false start, Elijah Wilkinson. Now you're in third and 11. A second false start in Elijah Wilkinson, and then they basically just gave up. Like they just basically, Zach Ertz is just like the check down, drag route across the middle. Everyone else goes long. And Giants play back almost everyone in coverage. I think like even just a 3-man rush, he just hits Zach Ertz there. That was a kind of like the point at least where it felt like at that point with the Cardinals, like you knew the white flag was waved. Like it was like they really had just kind of been at that spot of almost resigned to like we're going to lose this game. And that's where I think was most disappointing, was that I think that affected the defense as well. Of the defense affected the offense, where the offense is like, it doesn't matter what we do, they're just going to come back with a touchdown anyway. We can't stop these guys. And you now look at an 0-2 Cardinals team that's not going to get any easier with their upcoming schedule.
I really did feel like if anything was going to happen, it was going to happen on defense. So I thought to myself, if anything's going to change, it'll be an interception, it'll be the fumble caused, it'll be something that'll change the momentum. But I didn't think it was going to happen on offense. And yeah, you're just like you mentioned, we knew that on that third and long, we're like, it's going to be a check down. And those are like the most like air out of the stadium type of plays, because you know once you check it down, like especially if you're checking it down to a player that's not known for being very shifty. I mean, he's a tight end. We're not going to expect him to be shifty. You check it down, you're like, well, there they go. They're going to rally to the ball, and they're going to like it's that play that we all know as like, we're just giving up on that. We're just giving up. He's not throwing it deep to any of these receivers. He's not going to, after his like 3 or 5 step drop, going to look down the field and somehow get a laser into one of his wide receivers, especially when a lot of them are being double covered. They're dealing with double coverage. Like it was a gut punch, and I knew right then and there when we took the 2 penalties, the false starts that sent us back 10 yards, essentially, that was it. It was done for our offense.
Dobbs had a bunch of confidence in that first half. Whatever the Giants did defensively, I think a lot of it was that they were effectively just realizing Arizona was coming out with a conservative game plan. They went out looking to run the ball, take time off the clock, get out there. And I think that there's, for all the talk that we had, I think this is one of the places where we've seen, I think, kind of the pros and cons. Like, I think that no one's going to deny that the Cardinals are having a killer mentality. I think we've seen from Dobbs and from them in the fourth quarter, they just have not been able to come through in the clutch and kind of be those fourth quarter killers. That's something I think that we would hope that we'll be able to see. It's easy to forget that these guys are first time head coaches, first time play callers. Maybe we see that change or adjust in the future, or maybe just that's going to be one of the places that we'll see with this Cardinals team, is having a more conservative type of game plan with the big lead is just something that you'll see from head coaches. But it's a place of where I think you've seen enough like you said, with the foundation of the cards, it's hoping that we'll see next steps moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, before we kind of talk about just the upcoming schedule and just how this relates to the rest of the season, who are some of the players that stood out to you both positively and negatively for the Cardinals? Because the biggest thing I can say, at least positively, is Dennis Gardeck had another sack. He seems like he's primed. Zayvon Collins had a sack. It seems like Arizona's edge rushers ultimately are not going to be the same liability that I think people have expected for them coming into the season.
Well, you took my two. That was the ones that I was gonna call out was Dennis Gardeck, the you know the barbarian. He had a little bit of, and I felt good during the game because he had a little like segment, a little bit of like love given to him by one of the God, the name drop, like the name, like it doesn't pop up or anything like that. One of the broadcasters, there you go. He was
Yeah,
giving him love, saying like he was undrafted, and he was undrafted. He's one of the captains. He's just out there with his hair out and stuff, celebrating, loving life. So he's one of those guys that he's like one of those root for him like type of people, and like who's not rooting for him. And he is a well-deserved captain. I can't say enough good for Dennis Gardeck, especially since he dealt with his injury in 2021 and 2022. He was being used quite a bit, and but the problem was that it just wasn't to like the amount that we would expect from him. But now this coaching staff saw what they saw during the offseason, and obviously they made the right decision to give him those snaps. And we got our confidence in you. You can be a good container when it comes to like beating these like tackles on the outside and then switching back inside. I mean, when he chased down Daniel Jones, when he took that long trajectory around the tackle and still was able to shake him off and then stop Daniel Jones who sees nothing but clear field ahead of him, that tackle saved like what's possibly like an 8-yard to like a 10-yard gain. So those little things are exactly what you see in like good and to great players. So I'm really glad for him. Zayvon Collins had his first sack, and Zayvon Collins has been primed to get his first sack this season because he's been in
right.
those situations where he's like there, but maybe because of his inexperience at edge rusher, he doesn't do what like last week against the Washington Commanders, the Commies. He actually was basically like 2 yards behind the quarterback, but didn't disengage on the tackle. Had he disengaged on the tackle in time, he was just more so
Mm,
concentrating on bull rushing. The reason why I know he didn't disengage is because he didn't look back at the quarterback. He looks back at the quarterback at the moment he gets on the same level as him. That's a sack for him. But instead, he keeps bull rushing the tackle, and like he'll get that experience. But like he's showing some really nice stuff that I really like. So at least for our edge rushing, like especially with, I still agree with all this, just sending 4 people and keeping everybody else in coverage. Maybe we were diced up because of our coverage and not so much because of our fronts. So
yeah,
I,
it's that's players out in the grades too. I think if you take a look at a lot of the Cardinals' grades and how it played out, as far as within, if you had to pick a narrative for the game, if you had to pick a narrative for this, it would be that this first half Cardinals team was basically upended in the second half, where their weakest links kind of stood out again, just like last week. Elijah Wilkinson, at least, rated as the lowest of their players, at least for his offensive grade. It's interesting because Josh Dobbs' run grade was like almost Kyler Murray-esque. I know there were people who even were like talking about how Dobbs did a really good job as an athlete and in scrambling, which gave you probably some optimism as far as, hey, this is a veteran quarterback who can get out of trouble. That's one of the things that I think is different from if you had kept a Colt McCoy. Like, I think Colt McCoy's arm was just gone, but even if you had in this game, you're not going to be able to have that same type of rushing performance from Colt McCoy that you got out of Josh Dobbs, which I think was a boost to Arizona's offense. The other thing that was interesting as far as stat, Trey McBride probably had, in my opinion, at least one of his best games that we've ever seen from a pass blocking, from being able to make some of these like critical catches in the first half. I think on the defensive side, you take a look at that, and the Cardinals' corners at least didn't do as well. And I think, like you said, some of that was schematic, where they were trying to keep a lot of stuff in front. And we've talked about at least how an air raid system, sometimes when you see teams will be like, hey, like, we're moving these smaller routes, we can sit on those or close. We can play a lot of these quarters coverage like Brett Coleman had talked about. When you turn those quarters coverage and you take the safeties that the Cardinals have and are able to get them to bite on the play action, get them to bite on the run, that's where you all of a sudden can leave your corners on a bit of an island. And we saw that with the second half. Giants open up, boom, big touchdown to Jalen Hyatt. That seemed like it broke the game open. And effectively, we were able to see a lot of the Giants' passing attack wasn't able to be stopped in some regards because they had guys that were maybe not running it wide open deep, but it really did feel like they figured out an adjustment they could make on the Cardinals, and the Cardinals just didn't have anyone who were able to make a play. And it's unfortunate, but do you feel like this is something that heading into the next few weeks, do you feel encouraged by what we've seen from the Cardinals, or is this more of like a you had the chance at 2-0, you're 0-2, and look who's coming to town? Because I think you can make an argument for both.
I feel like it's gonna be like a play up, play down situation. So, I for the first 2 weeks, I'm sure people are surprised by it. I know that the Cowboys are a different like scenario altogether. They're a different type of team. Um, but they, so far, all I see is like with everything that's going on, I feel better about the Cardinals than I did before the season started. And even I was still thinking like they're not going to be as bad as people in the national media think. They're not tank worthy of like, hey, we're going to lose by 20 points every single game and it's going to be an absolute disaster. Jonathan Gannon is way over his head. He's just taking this job so he can put his foot in the door situation, and all these young guys like Nick Rawls, what is he doing even calling games? He's still like 30 years old, and like Drew Petzing's first job as an offensive coordinator. Like this team doesn't even know what the heck they're doing basically.
Yeah.
But like like the results show, like we lost the game by 3 points against an opponent that we probably shouldn't have even been close to beating. And then the week before, we actually had a lead on a team, especially because our defense was just like just overperforming what people thought. Like I heard so many times people saying like this defense is it's a bunch of like practice squad players. Like who do they have?
There are no household names there besides Buda Baker, and the Cardinals took it to the Giants, and they took it to the Commanders really well. And the Commanders put up like I think 35 points on a Broncos defense, which has a lot more national names for the most part that's on it. There's obviously differences as far as in play goes. I think those two turnovers were the big difference for Arizona last week, but it's the same type of fourth quarter in the clutch. They're just kind of in a spot where you're going to have to kind of live and die, at least with Josh Dobbs. And I think if the narrative coming out of some of this is if we still keep seeing Josh Dobbs being able to have a good first half lead, being able to be effective, but then we see these kind of collapses at the end of games, it's going to be a lot of questions, I think, for Cards fans. Let's do a quick preview, at least before we shift into, we'll have a film session, at least here after the recorded portion to kind of take a look at, so you can check that out on our YouTube channel if you're listening to this audio podcast. But what do you feel like we should expect from this team going forward? Because the upcoming schedule that they have, like next week they play the Cowboys. This is a team where if the Cardinals are, the Cardinals at least are going up fine against a Sam Howell, against like a Daniel Jones and a Giants team that's underperformed. You're probably getting like, if not the favorites in the NFC, you're at least going to be getting one of the top teams in all of the National Football League coming to State Farm Stadium. Rutrow, like that's something where I think, is this a place where we're gonna come in? Do the Cardinals have a chance to win this game, or is it just Cardinals are able to like have a 21-35 type of loss? They're giving all their effort. Is that good enough that we're gonna have to talk about? Because at this point, like I don't think anyone's expecting a win. Should we like be expecting them to at least be able to compete, or do you think this is gonna be like a non-competitive blowout type of game?
I think it's going to be more of like a first half is going to be closer than people would expect. In the second half, it'll probably just start getting away, and not in a schematic type of way. It's just because we saw it from this game, and I was looking at these stats while like we were talking about the Giants. The time of possession was just night and day from first half to second half. So if you really want to talk about like a defense being out there way too long than they should be, that was the story. And I think this is going to be the story for the Cowboys as well. If they're fresh, and because we know like a little tidbit of like schematic numbers when it comes to the Cardinals, if they're sticking to quarters in first down, most of the reason why is because they don't want to do too much on their outside corners when it comes to man coverage. Not saying they're not capable of doing it. I'm saying like maybe because they don't really have full on confidence and they don't want them out there one-on-one getting burnt. And that's what happened in the second half of this game. So when you're going up against the
Yeah.
Cowboys now, you're talking about a different uh like slew of receivers, and we're talking about a different type of passing attack. So that's probably the same trajectory we're gonna go, and it's just gonna come down to like just the fronts again, on making the difference. And I think when they're fresh, they do pretty well. They catch teams they don't expect them. When it comes to the offense, possibly I'm just hoping that we do something similar to like what we did in this game. I don't know if we're gonna get to the point where we're gonna actually score 20 points in the first half, but I think we can do enough. We can do enough
Yeah.
to take basically take time off
Your
the
hope
clock.
is to be in it. Your hope is to at least be in it, or that you can see a Cardinals team that maybe gets down 21-3 in the first half, but adjusts and makes that comeback in the second and has a chance at the end of the fourth quarter. That's probably, and it's unfortunate to say, that's kind of like the best that you can hope for from this team, because right now, as far as like, they don't have household names as far as talent goes. We have no idea any news on Buda Baker when he'll be back. You're kind of married to, unfortunately, this offensive line as is, and injuries would only make it worse as far as that goes. The next couple of games, at least, and I know we'll probably talk more about, like, if you're a person who's a Cardinals fan and you're on Team Tank, like, you're probably happy with how things have turned out. Like, you saw the effort, you've got that hard schedule coming up. We'll talk a little bit more maybe about just like projecting where the Cardinals are, the midst of the NFL, later in the week with their second show, but like, you've got the Cowboys, Cardinals. The Bengals are intriguing because Joe Burrow has not looked the same. They've played as a team that you wouldn't expect to be 0-2, and yet they are, and he's just been checking it down a lot, not been healthy. Jamar Chase has had a couple more drops, at least, where teams are just defending him a little bit better than they did last year. And they lost players like Jesse Bates on defense. The Rams have been better. So I think the biggest thing is you look at this upcoming schedule, and the question is, where is that first win for the Cardinals going to come from? And I think that honestly, their best shot that we can say was probably this game against the Giants. They didn't get that one. So where do you think is like the next place for opportunity? Or are the Cardinals going to have to like put up a lot of effort and steal one from one of these teams? Otherwise, we're going to be talking about, November, Kyler Murray coming back, what that's going to look like. And that's just a long ways off in what's already been a long season for Cardinals fans starting out 0-2.
I actually gotta look at the schedule again just to be able to pull that up. Maybe I would say, oh man, maybe the Browns. Maybe we can get a win on the Elves. The Falcons. That's a
Browns
possibility.
aren't the Browns 2-0, I think, at least? I think that
They
they are.
they are. They are.
Oosh.
Or they might be. I have no idea. I haven't been following them, but
Oh
that
no,
would
they're
be
1-0. That's right. They still play the Steelers today at least, so they're undefeated technically.
okay.
But we'll see how they do up against a Steelers defense. It's probably going to give them a lot more than the Bengals week 1, who just had an injured Joe Burrow. Um, yeah, that's also a road game. You've got Myles Garrett on the other side as far as it goes defensively. It's rough, I think, for Cardinals fans, because I think that if you could have said that we would have gotten one or even started off 2-0 and then lost games, I think fans would probably be a bit more accepting. Like, you get that home win, you're able to be competitive at least overall, maybe even getting that road win for the opener of the season. People are able to see it. Just looking at the way the schedule is set up, like the way that the Falcons have been running the ball, maybe you end up seeing to take advantage of a rookie quarterback. I think you're almost at this point, like, looking at a team like the Seahawks, at least, have not been able to do as well. And Tyler Lockett at least came back and was able to really help deliver in a big way. Like, you're talking about, did the Bengals have Joe Burrow playing? Like, I don't want us to be rooting for injuries, but if we're talking about this being an what's that called? Not an undefeated, but to say a completely defeated Cardinals team by the time that they play the Texans on November 19th, like, that might be one of those games where you're talking about playing for like a top overall pick or a top 2 pick up against a team that also so far through 2 games has looked like they may be worthy of that top pick. And that's just something where I feel bad, at least ultimately, for the players, because as long as the season drags on, like, we're going to be hoping, like, all right, when's Kyler coming back? And if that's all that we really have to look forward to for these next, like, 2 months, is just going to be like, pain and misery, dilly. That is one of those places where I think we're at least, I think, taking away from all this. We've seen enough from this Cardinals team to say this isn't going to be something that you can say is a one and done coaching staff. This is a totally different feel from what I think you saw last season, where it felt like that a clean house was inevitable. This is a different feel from when Steve Wilkes was there and Steve Keim was the GM, who coming off of the suspension and everything there. I think that I've seen enough so far that Marcos, if you're going to look for a comparison for the Cardinals to kind of put faith or put stock in, if you're a Cardinals fan, I think you look at the Detroit Lions right now. The Detroit Lions are a team that look to be probably right now one of the playoff teams in the NFC. They do lose in overtime to the Seahawks, but they were another playoff team. And this is a team that was at one point the worst team in the NFL. They ended up playing competitive in their first year. They got the number 3 overall pick and have been kind of able to turn it around with a good coaching staff. I think that it feels like we've seen so far this is a capable staff that has a good scheme overall and knows what they're doing. And I think adding more and more talent to that, to a team that's already playing hard, I think that that's the one positive takeaway that Cardinals fans, if you're out there and you're just feeling like the sky is falling, you're not looking forward to the next 2 months, banking at least on that and putting some of the hope there, I think that's probably the thing to look at for right now, is just to hold on for a little longer. And I think that we'll start seeing this team trend positively for maybe not in the near future, but at least in the future.
I mean, it's hard to believe because I was looking at the schedule, but like there's like quite a bit of winnable games that I 100% believed in, especially before like the season started. Now I definitely believe in it. The Steelers are definitely not that team that we thought they were going to be. So we got the Steelers.
They looked bad last week. They didn't play the Niners, but like if they lose to the Browns and it's not looking like good, then that December schedule's there. You've got the Cardinals, Texans, the Bears game. Merry Christmas, everyone! You got the Cardinals versus the Bears, and then the Seahawks. We'll see how they play. If they're in like playoff contention by that point, you think you can get one of those late season, everyone's sitting, steal a win type of games. Like that's possible. Falcons have not looked like they've been weird. They're 2-0, and yet it doesn't feel like that they're like a 2-0 team. It's just for one reason or another. Like they've had a good run game. They haven't gotten all of their weapons involved. They've just kind of been able to run the ball and play good defense overall, and we'll see exactly how they'll be doing at least by that point. But yeah, otherwise, I think the biggest
interesting.
Yeah, the Eagles matchup is going to be interesting. It's going to be cold. The biggest thing I think that I take away from a lot of this too is I think that going into this season, you'd have said, can't wait for the Rams game. They just don't have a whole lot of talent for the most part like that. They're rebuilding. Cooper Kupp is hurt. You look at the Bengals game, you say, oh, that's the one to be careful of. Like, you know, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, you got that defense that's coming back into town. It's almost flipped now where I think that I feel like I'm looking at this team like, man, like, I don't know if I want to play the Rams. They were doing such a good job playing against the Niners, and then the Niners were able to just run away with it in the second half. But the Rams were really just kind of dicing them up in that first half, and it took them kind of taking advantage of an inexperienced, I should say, Rams defense to kind of get that win. And yeah, so it's a rough spot if you're a Cardinals fan. I would not be shocked if this team is 0-6 before they play the Seahawks. I wouldn't be shocked if they end up 0-8 before they play the Browns. If we're talking about a team that essentially is 0-10 heading into that Texans game, I think that's realistic, and that's something that's like, you know, there's going to be a lot of us talking through it. There's going to be losses week in, week out. Looking for where the team is building, I think, is the best thing you can do for the future. And I think we've seen, at least, even if it doesn't feel like it, there are building blocks with this coaching staff and this team for Cardinals fans to look at.
I wonder what game is going to be the Kyler comeback game, the 49ers or the Bears. That's
really going to be interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of people have said, I've heard November has been kind of what I've heard for some of the times, as far as like maybe that's going to be active practicing for how he knows with the scheme, what that's going to look like, how soon he's going to come back. The only thing that I think we know for sure, at least right now, is he's going to be out against Cowboys. He's going to be out against the Niners. He's probably going to be out a bit longer just because he was put onto the PUP list. Otherwise, you'd think that he'd be back there practicing, working on stuff with the team. Or you'd start hearing more whispers about him coming back right for that Bengals game. If it ends up being a season-long type of area where just Kyler just ends up not being healthy, you're 0-10, you lose to a Texans team, like, at that point you wonder, like, where the team's going to be as far as if players are going to get shut down, just the owner suddenly, like, you know, actually start, like, trying to tell guys, hey, like, our season is basically over, like, let's make sure that we're not, like, you know, tearing more ACLs for guys next year, and it's a tough place to be in, but I think this is ultimately part of a rebuild and a reset, and I think that the Cardinals' direction they're going in, after you see on a game like that, even though the final score at least and the way that they collapsed is a negative, I think you've at least been able to see some places where there's at least enough confidence that I think Cardinals fans are going to be excited where this team is. Maybe not as much in 2023, but at least seeing what they're building on now heading into 2024. That'll be it here for the audio portion with the Redbird Reboot podcast. Thank you guys here for joining us so much. We're going to jump into a film sesh here for the most part. Marcos, let's talk about the film now. What was something that you felt like from seeing the film, taking a look at some of the All-22 that stood out to you with this Arizona Cardinals team? And what was something that you felt like was kind of unfortunate that stood out?
No, when we looked at it, it was more of the contain, because we knew that the second half that Daniel Jones was coming out and he was picking up those yardage with his legs, especially when you send those four, the front four, which is like two edges, two DLs. It doesn't matter if it's that or if you send a blitzing like a linebacker and you have to drop a DL into a zone. They created that shell, the opening up front. You know, that opening that we see constantly up the middle. And what they knew the Cardinals were going to have to adjust, they were going to have to drop some sort of a spy or a linebacker. So with the play calling, they were able to manipulate that same linebacker, and that linebacker had to stay in place just in case Daniel Jones was going to like take off from the pocket, try to gain some yards with his legs. And then they were targeting that middle slant, like that one by Darren Waller, which got them a chunk yardage, and it wasn't a crucial down. And that was one instance. Of course, another instance is because they were threatening with the run game, sucking in like the linebackers, getting the one-on-ones on the outside. Their receivers were just outclassing our corners.
They were beating up on
it was
the corners.
unfortunate. Yep.
Yeah. Let's go through real quick because I think we're going to see everything you just said we're about to see on film right over here. So we've got 1st and 10, at least with the Giants on the 35. You can tell how right now the Cardinals are basically been playing some of that quarters look. They're taking away the deep pass. And you can at least see in the intermediate, you can see at least some of the conflict that they get into with their linebackers. Right here, at least on the drive, you're seeing how you've got Darren Waller split up. You've got the Jesse Luketa there. You see Jalen Thompson's watching Saquon out of the backfield. You can see that Kaiser White, he's watching to make sure that Daniel Jones is not going to be taking off. You can see them kind of throwing a pass over to the tight end in that spot. He's kind of filling his spot in the zone. All Waller does is he finds that soft spot in the zone in between Jalen Thompson and the safety, and he just is able to make ultimately a pretty easy pitch and catch. Notice how the play action, everyone bites in the play action, they then reset. And in just that amount of time, Waller is able to get open. Watch it at least in the background from this angle here. You're able to see Waller runs up the field, and then you can see at least where he's there, Kaiser White, he just turns the corner, and Jalen Thompson's having to run back. Just being able to run some of that play action, turning the back, and then boom, getting the ball out quick, everyone bites. You can even see with Jalen Thompson, he's watching Saquon Barkley out of the backfield. And you can see Darren Waller gets into the place right between the soft spot and the zone. That's just really ultimately, I think, good coaching because you saw those adjustments being made in the second half by Brian Daboll. That leads to this 3-play sequence, which kind of tells that story of the second half here. This is the deep bomb that takes place. Jadarius Slayton was not completed, but Marcos, what are we seeing here, at least on this play, as far as for the adjustment that the Giants made? Because they didn't have any deep attempts in the first half, but the second half, they were able to at least attempt some of those deep passes on Arizona.
This one's like kind of like a quasi like cover one, and they shift to a cover two right before the snap. You can kind of see the safety bail, or what looks like the safety. Yeah, it is the safety. That is number 22.
Cover two, and it might have been cover four. Like it looks like they've got cover two because you're playing man coverage on the outside over here. So I'm pretty sure this is the cover two.
Yeah, and then you had those one-on-ones, like I mentioned. You know, they were really trying to test our cornerbacks, and they were when it came to like inexperience right there, especially on that type of release on the line of scrimmage. Now, what I like about what this coaching staff is doing is they're not trying to keep their corners 7 yards away from the line of scrimmage with that cushion, especially since like in those situations they just run these like these comeback routes just underneath, pick up like 10 yards and move down methodically. So I like that they're keeping their guys in more like closer to the line of scrimmage. So like let's just go back to like the beginning of this little portion right here, so that way we can see like just a little bit more, so that we can go ahead and pause it. Like the look, we'll just wait a little bit.
All right.
Right after this right here. Okay, right there. So you see how we have them manned up on the outside. I like that. But there's a lot that needs to be like when it comes to these corners, reading these wide receiver's hips. He basically just had a free release on the outside, and that kind of caught Keitrell Clark in a situation where he's not really so much flat-footed, but he man turns in a very like not in a very good position. And watch when if you play it, you'll see
Yeah,
the
he's
way
up there
he
manned up. It looks like he's got safety help over the top. It looks like they've shaded the safety to that side of the field. And then
yeah,
he ends
man
up
turning right
basically,
there.
he gets beat at
Yeah,
least, like you said, from the free release. And then you notice up top here, the actual corner sat back into different zone, I believe. And this is, unless I'm mistaken, I think that was, I'll check if that's Marco or if Christian Matthew is in on that snap up top at
I think
least. But
Marco
that's,
Wilson, right?
yeah, that's Marco. Yeah. And so up top, at least, you got the same type of an area where he actually kind of turns back around. He's expecting that to be almost like undercutting the route. Like that's going to be the spot
See
there. So the safety
the
ends up
difference between
also bails onto his
oh, go ahead.
side. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. He gets sucked in as well. So he was supposed to defend that other deep quarter. Um, he's mostly in a zone type of cover, so he's actually defending a deep half, and you
Yep.
have these guys somewhat manned up on the outside. Although if you see how Marco wasn't like the reason, so the term of man turning and zone turning means which
Mhm.
way is your corner turning. So man
Yep.
turning means you're turning towards the wide receiver. Zone turning means you're turning towards the quarterback. So you have man turn from
Yep.
Keitrell Clark at the
Yep.
bottom, Marco's zone turning. So maybe that could indicate a little bit of like split field coverage. Maybe it was man coverage at the bottom, the
Mhm.
field side, and then the boundary was zone
Right.
coverage.
Yep. And one of the things we talked about is this is Andre Shashir, who's here in the middle of the field. One of the biggest things that we've seen, I think, as Cardinals fans, we forget about is how good Buda Baker is at reading and erasing. You can see a lot of what this play here is they got two guys that are effectively being able to guard the tight end. You got someone at least with Darren Waller who's able to go. They could hit the check down right here, at least pick up a few yards. It's covered. They went for the home run play, and I think if this is Buda Baker back here in coverage, maybe some of it's the call that was there. But as far as the read goes, you're probably in a place where if both of the wide receivers are running those deep post routes, you should be the guy who's back there in coverage. And right now, I'm wondering if this was whether it was a mental error or whether it was just the way that the call was. Eyes get sucked into the quarterback, and Keitrell ends up being effectively left outside to have to defend this play on his own. He does a great job of turning his head back, looking for the ball. Like that's one of the things that's naturally you want to see in a corner. It's not like you want to see a corner like know the timing and be able to play through to break up the pass. This also is a place where, like, sometimes you end up with deep passes that are just a little bit outside. You can say at least this was a little bit lucky. He ends up seeing the pass just outside. He thinks it's a touchdown. Nope, he ends up out of bounds on that play. This is one of the places where I think people are forgetting this is a sixth round rookie who ultimately, he had another pass breakup, I think, in the game. He's been left on an island out over here. He didn't end up getting that safety help over the top that I'm sure he expected. He turns his corner very quickly, at least to be able to go off of it with each of those. That's the first play I think that you're seeing. So now it's 2nd and 10. This is the second play I think that you'll see from the Cardinals that tells that story of the second half. So Daniel Jones takes the snap. You can see at least they got a little bit of a scissors. I may not quite scissors concept because it's going to be a little bit longer, but he sits down over here on the play. Everyone, at least for the most part, is dropped back. You've got your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 men in coverage. It's a 4-man pass rush. And Daniel Jones is just able to escape out the back door. They're not able to get that pass rush, at least to contain him. And one of the things we'll see, at least for some of this, is early in the first half, the Cardinals were able to put multiple linebackers on the field to get pressure. Here, they're not able to break past. And Daniel Jones is able to pick up 9 yards with his legs, which I think was a huge story in the second half, was just Daniel Jones taking off a lot more often. What do you see, at least from this play, as far as with how Arizona was able to really defend it and how Daniel Jones ultimately was kind of in a make up your mind and kind of go for a quarterback decision? He was able to get them set up into 3rd and 1, or pretty manageable for the Giants on this drive and on a lot of other drives they had in the second half.
Well, that's exactly the issue that we had with contain. We were having contain issues, and even if we had those two linebackers in those hook zones, he like I don't have any ill will or like no offense towards Chris Barnes, but he's not, especially in that type of play. That read was a little too late, and he didn't have the athleticism to be able to close in fast enough, because he took off at a wrong angle where he had to flatten his angle towards Daniel Jones when it was already too late. like he's running at a straight line trajectory. He's
Hmm.
trying to close in, and he has a chaser behind him, and Cam Thomas, who if he does take in on that flat, like on that straight line angle, maybe he's able to tackle him from behind, but he turns, and it was Chris Barnes's job to be able to contain that. Instead, he for some reason thinks he's just like I don't understand what kind of angle that was. He's just staring at him, looking at him, and instead of trying to cut him off on that so he doesn't pick up the first down, he kind of closes in by running closer to him, straight up the field, and then turns it a little bit. Those little small steps right there, that killed it, and that gave
Yeah.
Daniel Jones the ability to be able to pick up that extra yardage. Unfortunately, the coverage was sound enough on the back end, so it wasn't their fault.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
why he
And if
picked
you
up
look,
the yardage.
especially look at this, like they effectively played this zone up pretty well. If he hits Saquon at least down to 2nd and 10 for the most part, the check down, you're at least going to have maybe a guy who could do with the blocking, but you've got these guys, this guy bracketed here at least with 0. Barnes at least looks like he's reading the quarterback, and then it looks like that he's playing the same thing as Kaiser White now. Maybe things are at least different as far as with the call, obviously, like you want to see, but like you said, he gets his eyes sucked in, and then by the time that he reacts, you can even see the late reaction with Jones. You have to remember, like, this is a guy who's going to rotate in. He's not necessarily like the starter. And the Cardinals, as far as their linebackers go, within Jonathan Gannon, they're making do with, there's not first round picks that you're seeing at least on there. And when the Cardinals have had first round picks, they've had a lot of adjustments. But like you said, this is one of those different plays of where Jones, you rush 4, you drop 7, and if the quarterback's going to take off, you want to try to either bait or have the quarterback not be able to go anywhere with that contain. And that angle ends up being something that's important here. I think that at the end of the day, you then see that set up the third play, at least overall, with the Giants, which is, of course, the 3rd and 1 from the 31. Now, this is one that I think at least was the play that everyone knew what the outcome was going to be. It's 3rd and 1. You got to tush push, basically. And that's something that Jalen Hurts has made it done. It's 3rd and 1. Some people have wondered, should this play be banned because it's an auto conversion? My whole thing, at least on this, I'd say is, look, if you set it up where you're able to tackle Jones and take that right angle where it's 3rd and 2, you can't do a tush push then on 3rd and 1. That's one of the spots of where it's going to favor the offense. It's unfortunate. Like, you saw this. This is also how they scored a touchdown late in the game with by kind of doing that. And I think it was like 3rd and 1 or 4th down. This is something that is just part of where the modern NFL is, and part of where you have to adapt is by being able to effectively kind of stop teams and not get them into these short yardage situations from the get-go. And that's where the story of this play was made, was on things are more opened up on the first down where they're able to throw deep. Safeties at least got caught up into conflict, and you had to just with some of the guys, they weren't making at least like the right plays in areas. And I think that's not a spot to say that like it's bad specifically on the player, because defense as a whole is played by everyone. But it does, I think, say that the Cardinals defense in one way or a form, they did well in the first half. The Giants adjusted. It's kind of like a boxer where you get used to that right hook. Well, eventually you duck that right hook. Do you have anything else that they can come with? And ultimately it was just that right hook, it seems like, how the Cardinals were able to come with. But that's all I think, at least as far as for the video that we were looking at for the most part. Was there any other last second comments you wanted to make, Marcos?
Just keep on going, Cardinals fans. Let's take our little victories while we can. And so far, we've had enough of those little victories to know that like this foundation is not just going to be like built with like mud and like dirt and whatnot. It's actually being built by concrete. And
Mm-hmm.
whatever is being said on the outside, we all know it's going to be negative. We know it's going to be negative because that's all they can pretty much do when it comes to covering the Cardinals, is just
Right.
talk about how we're just going to be in the slumps for probably the entire year. Just ignore it. Take, like I said, like take a lot of nuance into every perspective. Everything's deeper than what is being said, and really pay attention to like the little things that you need to see. And that's especially going on for when Kyler Murray comes back. Take notice of the little things, the
Mm-hmm.
little improvements, and we'll get there slowly but surely.
Yep. Oh yeah, no, the deep passing game was the biggest one. I just thought of that underthrow, that was the overthrow at least that was picked off and declined, and there was another underthrow I think later in the game. But that was one of the biggest differences I think too. Is just Daniel Jones is a better quarterback in terms of being able to adjust and go deep, and Cardinals are starting at that spot right now. Yeah, we'll be back with a further breakdown of Josh Dobbs, seeing some of the areas that he did improve, some of kind of where we're able to see him be able to not just manage the game, but make some plays with his legs. That'll be later in the week. We'll also be able to preview the upcoming Cowboys game. Thank you guys again for tuning in. Make sure you're following the Redbird Reboot on Twitter. Make sure you're also checking out our work. Marcos is writing with AZ Sports Underground. I'm at Revenge of the Birds. Marcos, why don't you tell everyone where they can follow you on Twitter as we wrap up today?
You can follow me at Pancake Soul, and once again, you can find my work at AZ Sports Underground.
Absolutely. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. I'm Blake Murphy 7. You've been rebooted. That means it's time for us to log off. Have a good one, Cards fans.